Okay, it's 10:04, August 8th, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. We'll start now. We're a little light on membership here today, but we'll do the best with what we got. And can start by recapping a little bit of what we talked about last meeting. We ended up focusing mostly on indoor cultivation details. There's Kurt. And yeah, we ended up with quite a few details with that to go over. We talked a lot about water, coastal zoning, a little bit about roads. And we have some information from community development engineering about roads, so maybe we'll start with that.
Before we jump in, let me talk about some things.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
So the next board meeting, what's agendized is a cannabis update that's not specifically a working group update, it's just a cannabis update. So I'm going to update the board on some things, and then you or whoever can also will just have a kind of a joint shared agenda item. The retail and manufacturing ordinance is in progress. I'm hoping it's close. I want to get it to the Planning Commission as fast as possible. It's either going to be September or October. But what that means is if we're going to hit cultivation by, get it to the Board of Supervisors by December, it needs to be right on the heels of the retail. We're looking at, you know, consecutive months or consecutive board meetings even. So it might be a little chaotic just trying to get the whole thing done. So what comes back here, like what would be ideal is this group approves unanimously an ordinance, it goes to the ERC, it goes to the Planning Commission, it goes to the board. We might kind of have to be doing parts of these things simultaneously and hope what ends up at the board is what everybody's happy with. And so I'm going to try to get drafts out soonish, but just kind of be ready for it to be a little hectic. When it comes to cultivation, I listened to the last two board meetings, and I think the conversations are good. I think these are the right things to be talking about. But I think realistically, there's going to be a cultivation ordinance that's quite limited and simple to start, and then we'll keep working on it for months, probably. If we're going to get something to the board early December, I think the group needs to pick the one thing, the one zone, the one style of cultivation that's going to go first, figure that out, and then we can come back to all the different issues. So if it's going to be a small outdoor on timberland, let's focus on that. If it's going to be indoor on manufacturing, let's focus on that. If it's going to be, you know, indoor and existing structures in ag land, let's focus on that. But I think in order to get the thing moving, there's got to be a first thing to grab. And I've tried to conceive of the retail manufacturing ordinance in a way. Part of the reason it's taken a while is I'm trying to make it a seamless regulatory regime where we can add things to it without rewriting it or without creating a parallel structure for cultivation versus retail. So there'll be, you know, a zoning ordinance, but then there's the use permit ordinance that should be flexible enough for every type with some specific regulations. So hopefully we've done that well, or we're going to do that well. And so if it starts out, you have a use permit for cannabis cultivation, and then a section of specific regulations, and then a zoning ordinance that says where you can do it. We can then expand that zoning ordinance to a lot more places, add to those regulations as appropriate. Use permit functionally stays the same or very close, and we should be able to update and amend this thing without a ton of hassle realistically over the next, you know, couple of years. And I'm thinking if everybody's willing, this working group continues to meet, maybe less often, but continues to meet long term because it's a long term issue. So, Heidi looks like something to say.
Oh, I would just like to know, do you think there's a chance that if we were to hold a meeting next week that we would be able to have the working group review of that draft commercial and manufacturing ordinance? Or is that too soon? I'm just thinking as far as schedule. I mean, if we can...
If we scheduled that, I would commit everything I've got to make it happen.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Let's say
I'm just
yeah.
thinking because we really have an expedited schedule, and the sooner we can get the feedback from the working group on the ordinance, the sooner we can get it up to the planning commission, onto the board.
Yeah, I'm willing to do what it takes.
Would we receive the ordinance before the meeting, or would we receive it at the meeting?
You'd receive it before, you'd receive it, at least 3 days before. It'd be a draft document, but it'd become a public record. And so, we can't really stop it from circulating widely, but, it will be an ordinance, it'll look like a law. And there's, we'll see how close I can get it. Sometimes I leave these things in like a red line so you can see why certain words look the way they were with comments. I'm gonna try not to do that. I'm gonna try to bring something that looks like a finished product. But if there's things that I want the working group to weigh in on, keep in mind that, we did look at a lot of regs. We did look at a lot of things. And so there's a lot of stuff that's like staffy, that's, about, even there's a bond requirement that I threw in there. There's things that I pulled out of the state regs that looked like a good idea that we never ever talked about. So you'll see an ordinance that has a lot of stuff in it that works for staff that we never talked about. So
Yeah, I'm looking at
you ready for that?
the new round of regulations and the bureau licenses, which retail is under. There's new details and specifics that I'm seeing here for the first time that I don't recall ever talking about. So I have some reading to do to get up to date.
There's also something that I want to put out now so people can kind of be thinking about it, because I'm a little unclear how the state's going to work it. We will have a 1-year license. It's not going to be an ongoing entitlement that you have a vested right in. It'll correspond to the state issue. A lot of times a use permit is approved by the planning commission with conditions that have to be met before the actual permit is issued. If we did it like that, and I've seen other counties do it like that, where you're not actually going to get your use permit until you've got your state license. I'm not sure if the state's going to give you a license until you have your use permit.
Right.
So the kind of gymnastics that I have built in there is you get a year from the date of your state license. You can apply for renewal of your state license, I think 60 days before. So when you apply for your renewal of your county license, you have to have proof of your renewal filed of state license. These are timelines that we might get in there and find out they're really hard to meet. But I've never applied for a state license. I don't know if Robert has more insight on exactly how it's going to go, but keep in mind there's some of those kind of things that, when we talk about kind of foreseeing what our weird things are going to be or unintended consequences, that's the kind of thing I'm trying to iron out before we move forward. That's why things are taking a while.
Sounds good. And I also agree about focusing in on the cultivation details. At our last meeting, we had a lot of stuff on the agenda, and we talked mostly about indoor cultivation details. So there's definitely, as we talk, more stuff comes up that nobody thought of. So,
well, is there kind of consensus about what might be the first cultivation category the group wants to recommend to the board?
I don't think we really, group. We didn't really get much into picking one. We just sort of, got into details of indoor and sort of ran with it, but I don't think we did that intentionally to pick it. It was just how it happened.
I think, Heidi and I have always kind of planned on it being on timberland. That's kind of what we've been looking at and talking to the board about and dealing with going back a year and a half, 2 years I don't know what Heidi's thoughts are on indoor in commercial or manufacturing, but those aren't kind of, cultivation or agriculture isn't kind of an underlying use in any of those. So even with our kind of combining district concept, you know, that's not really a consistent use. That might even be a general plan problem that, you know, I'm saying that might be one of the more complicated aspects of this, maybe not ideal for the first.
Yeah.
Indoor and ag land might be more straightforward.
Right.
We just have to deal with coastal commission.
Indoor seemed more like a, oh, go ahead.
TPZ will also be very complicated with water issues, and I can tell you that you will find a hard time building consensus on that.
And indoor seemed more like a manufacturing process more than an agricultural process. And so there was, you know, it's a different animal, different considerations entirely.
Yeah, I mean, it might be more like manufacturing. I don't know.
If you guys are if we're trying to pick the easiest one to iron out, in my opinion, it's clearly indoor. Indoor cultivation is going to be, as far as all of the greater details involved, extremely simple to get a written ordinance as opposed to outdoor when you're talking of all these different environmental situations, locations, and resource uses. So indoor is going to be super simple. I'm a little alarmed by the thought that we're only going to try to pick one and try to legalize that by the end of the year, when we're looking at a timeline of the state getting out of this overlap year that we're dealing with right now, where operations are still operating under previous rules, but in 2019 we're trying to come underneath this California regulation that is going to eliminate the old rule and allow only people to operate under these rules we're trying to put in place. And so the county's thought of only picking one of these, let's say, for example, indoor cultivation. January 1, the county's going to shut down everybody who's doing outdoor cultivation, if that's the case, if we don't put something on paper.
We're just trying to be just trying to be realistic.
You know, realistically, we're going to pick one, or we're not getting any by January 1st. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
It's going to be one or none. So
Yeah,
if
and
you
so-
want to take what you think is the most prevalent practice of these co-op models and try to legalize that, let's do that.
Right.
Is that indoor? Is that outdoor? Where is it? Who are they? I don't know.
The most prevalent is probably outdoor, I would suspect, just in a quick guess.
Yeah.
However, that's going to be the hardest and longest drawn out
I'd say
one.
there's a greater number of indoor by far, because you don't know where they are. If I had to guess, you know, there's definitely a greater number of indoor operations because you can hide them. Outdoor operations, you can see them in one quick flight. So it doesn't mean that there's a greater number of indoor operations that, you know, that want to be legal. That's a completely different question. I'm not quite sure how to gauge that. I've tried, you know, here in the county, but people are still, even at this point, reluctant to come to the meetings. We don't get cultivators here talking about what they want to see in the ordinances. People are afraid to speak out. People are afraid to even, you know, comment on social media about it. So it's difficult to gauge, you know, what's going on, and, you know, which type of operation would be able to utilize a state license, you know, most, and what's going to bring the greatest number of people, the greatest number of jobs, you know, whatever, not disrupt, you know, disrupt the least number of existing operations that intend to be legal at some point. I'm not sure what that is, really. I'd just be guessing.
What is it we're trying to achieve with this first
Simplicity,
license?
something.
Well, no, I mean, in a larger sense, are we trying to get people who have been cultivating illegally to reform and cultivate legally? Are we trying to
Yeah, the people who
ensure-
want to do that.
I mean, that's part of the grandfathering that I was told this group was not going to do. My understanding was that the attempt was to license cannabis in such a way that it didn't give preference to people who had been operating illegally. Rather,
Sure,
it
yeah.
encouraged the best business for the county.
Right.
And if that's the case, then we need to think, if we're going to have to pick one, what is going to provide the best return for the county itself.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't thinking so much in terms of grandfathering or, you know, like what you're talking about, but more just those are the people who would be in a position to apply for a license or have the interest or the resources or the knowledge or whatever. That's kind of what I think what Joel is getting at. You know, if we have operations that are existing, they're good operations, ones that would be able to be compliant with the rules and regulations that we're talking about, then it seems like we would want to be able to allow those to apply for licenses, not to grandfather in operations that are dysfunctional or that can't work, or to prioritize people who were taking advantage of the system in one way or the other. I think that's what we want to do, the opposite of that. I think those are the problems that we've seen in other counties where they went larger and really did prioritize the people who just focused on making money and didn't care about the land or the people or whatever, or the community largely.
And you know, you say illegal operations, but I guess that's a really gray term in what we're discussing right now, because you know, there's a lot of operations that aren't exactly illegal. They're operating under collective models with laws in place for the state of California, and in all amounts of what I'm trying to discuss, I'm talking about those type of operations that are operating quote-unquote legally within all existing laws. Those are the ones where I'm concerned if the county, for example, if there's an operation completely operating legally under 215 previous collective model laws as an outdoor operation, and the county at the end of the year decides only to put an indoor cultivation ordinance on file, where there's a business that's been operating totally legally under California law, and then the county doesn't approve an ordinance, which then the county goes in and shuts this quote-unquote business down, this collective medical model down. I mean, I think there's a lot of kickback in this state right now in general, and I wouldn't be surprised to see lawsuits in place that extend this overlap period for longer than just 2018. It expands into 2019. But that's all completely out of our hands and something that we would never know till the end of this year. But I'm more concerned with trying to get these businesses, quote unquote, they're not really businesses, but they're essentially businesses, to continue into the next year.
Well,
I definitely don't want to see illegal operations that are breaking all these laws being able to.
I think if you look at who's most likely to have the ability to get licensed, is probably somebody who's already functional, because it's going to be a process. So the state's going to be hard enough. I kind of assumed that what we'd be doing is giving an opportunity for people growing in a co-op collective model to get a license. Now, I had always assumed that was outdoor. Maybe that was ignorance on my part. I don't know who they are, where they are. I don't necessarily see that timberland is going to be that difficult. I think we've always talked about requiring a rezone so they're not on TPZ anymore, so they don't have those tax benefits while they're doing commercial cannabis and things like that. Water quality, 1602 permits. There's a lot of state regulation for water that I think we would piggyback on, and if it turns out we need some local regulation, we can talk about that or add it later as the need arises. The roads issue I think is interesting. If we're requiring them to, fix up their roads, are they going to be financially viable anymore?
Yeah, roads are going to be the thing that would be the most expensive to fix and mitigate, especially if you're talking about a county road that can't support traffic, and that would be out of touch for a property owner to fix a county road.
Yeah, and I guess, if the county doesn't have the money to invest in these roads to allow business to happen out there, then probably it shouldn't happen out there. And then maybe TPZ land is not really viable for that reason.
Well, PO, the zoning doesn't matter, it's just timberland.
Sure, timberland.
Yeah, so there could be a significant number of, whatever the number is for indoor operations, I would guessing a lot of the existing ones wouldn't be permittable in the locations that they're in. A lot of them are just too near or in residential areas or whatever, in buildings that wouldn't quite be suitable, places that don't support commercial traffic, et cetera. But it doesn't mean that these people wouldn't be interested in moving their operation to a suitable location and may have the resources or investment connection to be able to do that. And that's something that can be done. It creates jobs.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably highly likely that a lot of the both indoor and outdoor operations are going to have to look at possibly moving based on zoning and what we talk about. But I just would like them to still have a chance to continue their business, their job that they've created for themselves, and have that choice.
The cost wasn't an issue. You probably could set up an indoor operation quicker than an outdoor operation if you're running up against permitting issues or land development issues. Those things take time sometimes, regardless of how much money you're throwing at them, whereas setting up a manufacturing type operation in a building you can do pretty quickly. It's expensive.
Joel, as far as you saying that you would like to prefer one method, if we give you our feelings on multiple methods, can you get the job done in time by a certain date, like by the end of August? If we decide to kick butt and go every week and figure out what we as a consensus want, what is your deadline date that you would have it to get it? Because that's where it seems like we've been in the past. We've given like the personal use and that kind of stuff. We haven't even seen that, and that was back in May. So is it
passed?
Huh?
Yeah, personal use is the law now.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's all done.
that came back.
I never did see the final thing on it, but
The issue is the more you give me at once, the more of a bottleneck I become.
Right.
And so you give me 5 things to turn into an ordinance at once, I can't make any
You'd have to
promises
pick.
at all.
You'd have to pick.
I'd have to pick one and,
Right,
and,
right.
and run with it.
Sure.
And if you gave me all the things you want, you give me a wish list, I can cull and pick the one that I think is workable in an ordinance form and bring that back. But I'd rather you choose the one you think is the one you want to focus on, and let's,
I agree
you
with
know,
that.
and we can keep working.
Yeah.
It's just,
I think focusing doesn't mean giving up on having multiple, types of cultivation at some point. I think it's just realistic, I think, to just focus on one thing at a time is all. I don't know. What do you think, Kurt?
Oh, no, I think certainly you should focus on one thing at a time.
Sure.
I mean,
Okay.
I think, I'm not going to sit here and go back through all these old meetings, but I want to say, like in February, I sat here and said that if we don't have it all figured out by August, it's not going to happen by the end of the year. And now we're here in August, and we're just discussing that it's not going to happen by the end of the year. Well, that was kind of like plainly obvious a long time ago.
Sure.
But, yeah, so now in August, we want to pick one and make sure it's done by the end of the year. Yeah, my 2 cents are pick indoor, just because of what the things I just said. That it's the most easy and less cumbersome type of cultivation to get the final thing on it, and then move on to the next one. If we go the other route and start working on, let's say, outdoor and TPZ and ag and other commercial jurisdictions, well, that be lucky if that gets done by the end of the year, and then you just have to work on the next thing.
I agree. Indoor's a good place to start.
well, let's talk about that. I think that we could do indoor ag, and if we really wanted to narrow it to something simple, we could do indoor non-coastal ag. It's not a lot of area, but before we spend a lot of time and energy on indoor in, say, C4 or M, I'd want an opinion from the planners on general plan consistency, because amending the general plan is going to be a thing,
Sure.
like quite a thing. And so I would not want to start with that. And Heidi, I don't know if you have anything to say on that.
I agree, that's a concern, and we're going to need to spend some more time revisiting that.
Right.
When we had the discussion at our last meeting, when I returned to the office, I started thinking about it a little bit more, and haven't taken the time to investigate it further, but I think we need to definitely examine it.
Yeah, it's not considered ag in some areas. It is considered ag, I guess, in others. County code, manufacturing agriculture is principally permitted, I believe, in parcels over 1 acre, interestingly. Not that they would all be parcels over 1 acre, but it's in there somewhere. It's either principally permitted or with a use permit. Agriculture is included in the M zone.
On M land?
Yeah.
Well, that might be, the narrow place to start might be M land over 1 acre indoors. I don't know how many parcels that would even allow to work, but.
I don't know, Jesse, was that coastal or non-coastal, do you recall?
I don't recall
Okay.
if it was in
All right.
both or one or the other.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
What about in like C3, C4, where you have lots that are large, like say acre or 5 acre or whatever, larger lots, and then they can meet certain setbacks? What's the issue with that?
So, you know, with the way planning works, you have your land use designations, like commercial. And the general plan has criteria for that, it has goals for planning for that, it has uses that are consistent with that. And then the zoning is the specific regulations that apply them. So, you know, it would take an assessment of what really is entailed in that indoor cultivation and the size and things compared to what the policies and the goals for the underlying land use are. And so, you know, that's really a planning call, right? If they think it's consistent, or if some version of it is consistent, we can go from there. But it's not merely about kind of mitigating the effects with setbacks. It's about, is it consistent with the underlying, it's this vertical consistency requirement that's kind of constitutional.
Sure.
Can we just define indoor commercial cultivation as manufacturing within our county?
I don't know.
You get your license from CDFA, like not from the Bureau or from the Public Health, which does manufacturing, which is kind of interesting because it's, I don't know.
Well, there's kind of an industrial side of agriculture, right? That I guess maybe it depends how you're treating it in your general plan, because this is something that is highly vetted and has a lot of community involvement, and you know, that's a big conversation with the way you're designating land and treating it, that I wouldn't necessarily want to go back and change basic treatments of what's manufacturing agriculture now, unless we're going to really reopen that thing.
Okay.
You know, the general plan is kind of the big terrain, and the zoning can be adjusted and amended so long as it's consistent with that. But if we're going to go in and really fundamentally change the way we designate our land uses, that's a big project.
So do you guys want to spend some time thinking about whether or not manufacturing and indoor jive before we talk a lot about that? And then we have stuff to talk about with agriculture. We talked a lot about that, about whether or not it was appropriate for some agricultural lands to include indoor.
I think, Joel, do you think we could report back next week if we meet next week on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Let's do that then and not get into indoor in manufacturing areas on this meeting. But we did have, I wish Blake was able to be here because has a lot of input about uses of ag land for indoor. And we were talking about the smallest tier, which is up to 5,000 square feet. Or no, that's the second tier. It's 500 square feet's the little one. 5,000 square feet is the next one.
Could we perhaps do the roads and see where we get
Yes,
with that?
yes,
And that way,
yes.
that way, if we don't get to ag land,
Yes,
Blake will
let's
be
do
here
that.
maybe next week.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for reminding me on that one. And then just in the context of that, the roads and such, if we do end up getting to a small-scale outdoor cultivation, I think we can simplify things maybe by leaving out TPZ zoning in the beginning.
I would like to throw out just before
Yes.
we move on, that, Del Mar Patients Together, we've always stocked a lot of local products. And the bulk of it, I would say was produced, at TPZ and PO zone properties within our community. And so I'm thinking, you know, and I'd really prefer to see us as an indoor kind of culture in some ways, but then on the other hand, there are, I think, a lot more entities, you know, that would benefit from, you know, taking advantage of the next season on the legal marketplace. And just to mention, you know, as far as legal operations, you know, that's always been a gray area, and we could have solved that since 1996 in this county. We could have made some sort of ordinance that dealt with medical cannabis and whatnot, but we didn't do that, and so they've been operating collectively, you know, under the state of California, and some are pretty sloppy, you know, and some are very commercial and you know, using the collective model as an umbrella, but the states, you know, a lot of what was written into the state, you know, when we first got that law was kind of under the assumption that that existing operations would be prioritized in. I just wanted to put that out there before we moved on. But
It's true, there was a state provision that, I think they're kind of dropping it, but in the event that the state got backed up with processing applications, they were to prioritize existing operations that were bona fide collectives before a certain date. But I don't know if they're sticking with that anymore. But yeah, that was the intention, you're right. So yeah, roads.
I'll go with the direction of the group, you know, wanted to put that 2 cents in.
Yeah.
Okay, is this working? Okay. I put together a 3-page handout. It's very much an oversimplification of the county's road standards, but to give you guys some guidance on what are we looking at and where. So I'll just start with the first page, which is our urban and rural public road standards. The urban streets, for the most part, we're looking for curbs, gutters, sidewalk, and paving. And that's primarily the Crescent City area. And then outside of that would be rural roads. So they would have graded shoulders, ditches, and paving. The 2 most common scenarios, one being urban and the other rural, I put on here. So on a typical local road, which would be Douglas, Harding, those kinds of roads, you're looking at a 60-foot right-of-way with these road widths, the 5-foot sidewalks, the paving and such. On places like North Crest and Lake Earl and Elk Valley, you're looking at a different road standard, but I would assume this is going to apply in the majority of locations. There were a lot of questions about roads like Low Divide, where we have a county-maintained road status on a graveled surface. And so I did make the statement at the top that unpaved roads would likely not be recommended for acceptance into the county-maintained road system if they were offered for acceptance today, as they do not meet minimum urban and rural road standards. And what happens as a result of the unpaved road surface is that it requires a lot more maintenance than a paved surface. I did give you guys the code section for existing substandard county maintained roads. And what that section is about is if the crown of the road and the slopes of the road or the sidewalks missing, what road improvements need to be done as development occurs. And then I also gave the phased improvements within existing subdivided areas standard, which essentially says if the road doesn't meet the road standards above, that we don't recommend them for acceptance into the county maintained road system, and the maintenance is the obligation of the adjacent property owners. So you're looking at this out off of Elk Valley across from Hambros out in that area, just so you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at.
So these would be county roads that would require like property owner maintenance, is that what you're saying?
So within the Crescent, so for the most part, parcels that are less than 1 acre and in the urban area are going to be under the standard of urban and rural public roads. Private rural roads are for the most part parcels greater than 1 acre. So even if they aren't county maintained at this time, they fall under the urban and rural public road standards. The second page is the standard for private rural roads. I don't know how often this would apply to what you guys are looking at. Essentially, it boils down to the SRA fire safe regulations as the minimum standard. When the code was put together, it was based on the original standards. And so I just put in the Title 19 standards, which are the 20-foot wide road grades not exceeding 16%, radius of curves, and then the maximum length of dead-end roads. I think those are probably the most significant for what's being considered. So once you get off of a road like Low Divide and you start going on a spur road, that's where you start measuring the dead-end road. Once you're over a certain length, it requires an exception from CAL FIRE, which means that the permit may or may not be approved. And then the final page are kind of the concerns that we have in the back of our minds. Dust abatement being significant, potentially water quality impacts, which is also dust concerns. Routine increases in routine grading and rock replacement. We have had to haul a lot of rock onto these roads. And then speeds, the faster people go, the faster we lose our rock. Right now, we do trip permits for oversized loads, which allows us to mitigate some of the burden from these loads. Potentially, that could be done for something like this, for rock replenishment and such. I came up with just something to throw out there that would be an annual trip permit based on the state cannabis permit tier and mileage on an unpaved county maintained road. I don't know if that's a good fit, but that was just an idea. So I don't know what you have for questions, but that's just to kind of give you an outline.
You have a question. Annual application of dust palliative, what does that mean?
So there's substances you can put on roads to keep the rock on the road. I'm gonna call it a glue for layman's terms. The catch is that we get a tremendous amount of rainfall up here. And so what would last 3 years in many other counties does not last here. It hardly lasts a season. So it might not be the most viable option, but you'll hear it if you're looking into the roads. And so just so you know it's there, but it's not ideal for our climate.
Got it.
Looking at the road standards, it looks to me like a lot of the roads that are currently being used off of places like Low Divide don't meet these fire standards. Do you know if those are going to be compliant with the California requirements for the roads that are entailed in the cannabis permitting process?
I'm not understanding the question.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the private roads, that would be the responsibility of the applicant or the landowner to, to build and improve the road to meet county standards.
The state has requirements for cannabis operations on these unimproved roads.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen the specifics of the state requirements for road standards beyond county standards, so I'm not familiar with it. Yeah, my concern is mostly with this last page, the unpaved county maintained roads, because if we're talking about outdoor cultivation, I would say that a good percentage of them, probably the majority of the suitable properties, timberland properties, are accessed by unpaved county maintained roads that would obviously be beyond the scope of an applicant to, you know, to change or modify or pave a county road. And so I guess trying to get a sense of, is it even possible? Is it, you know, what kind of commercial load can be added? You know, like, for example, on Low Divide, I have a friend who got a use permit for a small agriculture operation, a tree farm, and a farm stand. And there were some notes on that use permit that did mention, you know, the poor standard of low divide and maintaining, suggesting reducing traffic. I don't remember all the details or how enforceable it was, but there was comments about that. But they did, you know, the county did issue a use permit for a commercial operation off of low divide, provided it's small. And so what I'm trying to understand is, how do we do that if we're going to talk about small scale cannabis permits? How do we do it so that it doesn't exceed the capacity of these dirt roads? And then how do we metric that? You know, how do we determine what is the design carrying capacity of the road versus what's consistently there or currently there already? And like low divide has a lot more traffic than the county is aware of, and I think there's a lot more houses and residences there than are on the books that the county knows about. So there's already way more traffic going on. So how do we take that into account, you know, design capacity into account and not overdo it? Is it even possible? So I like your options here, requiring annual trip permit fee, things like that, you know, to try to specifics in your operation plan that gives some real details about how much traffic you're going to generate, either with your daily operations or with truck deliveries, those kinds of things. So it's a lot to go over.
I think the operation plan is key, right? If they have a plan, then staff can kind of measure those impacts. I do wonder about enforcement, though. You say one thing in your plan, and how are we really going to know how many loads you're taking or something like that? So I'd want there to be sufficient kind of guarantees of road improvement to where if you're lying a little bit, or if you've misanticipated your needs a little bit, it's not going to be catastrophic on the roads.
Sure. This is why I'm
something we can build in without, I mean, if somebody's trying to do 5,000 square foot grow outdoor on low divide, what kind of improvements to the road would you need? And what do you think they'd cost? Would it be so prohibitive that we should just say low divide's a lost cause?
I don't know the answer to that, because I don't know the industry and I don't know what the trip generation looks like.
Right. That's why I'm leaning toward, you know, at least in the beginning, starting off with the smallest scale, you know, and suggesting, you know, bumping up the scale is a big deal, because it generates people. Like we were talking about this at the last meeting, and Eric and I have different views about what it takes to be successful. You know, what is the minimum size that is even worth investing in? And you know, he'd like to see things go a little bigger, but you know, at over 5,000 square feet or a 10,000 square feet garden, I think you're definitely going to have a handful of employees. You know, I think Kurt and I talked about this. We disagree a little bit on the number of employees that it takes to run an operation. To run an operation competitively in today's market, it's going to get harder and harder, and it's going to be more and more intensive. So even the first tier, a 2,500 square foot, which is the smallest tier, you'd be hard pressed to run that one person, like year round, to run it consistently at maximum production. You're going to have employees, absolutely. You're going to have some commercial delivery a little bit. You know, it depends on how you run your operation, but you're going to have 10-wheelers, you know, delivering dump truck loads of material probably. Not every day, maybe a couple times a year only. But when you're setting up, when you're starting, when you're building a farm, construction, concrete delivery, especially permitted construction, all the stuff you have to load up there, you know, rock, materials.
You're saying this is true of a 5,000 square foot?
Well, I'm talking about 2,500 square foot. Any scale, you know, any construction, you know, building a house generates a lot of truck traffic for 6 months to a year. Contractors driving medium-duty pickups every day, you know, so that's going to go on a permitted farm, especially, you know, as you're required to build and construct things that you may not have anticipated, or you don't even want to necessarily build, but you have to in order to meet rules and regulations. There's going to be a fair amount of construction going on any scale, I think. So.
And a fair bit of heavy equipment from time to time,
yes,
also being trailered up.
Certainly, yeah.
So I have a question based on all this road paperwork you've got here. So and we keep talking about Low Divide Road, and it's a good example because it's one that everyone's familiar with and has an idea what it is, what it looks like. The actual physical main road that goes up Low Divide, that's a county maintained road, right? And so the county must have some idea currently like how much money they're putting into it on a yearly basis, right? And so essentially all the spur roads that come off of that are then private property maintained, personal private property owners that are maintaining them.
Forest Service.
Or by the Forest Service. Okay. And I'm not going to downplay the need to make sure that these roads are viable and used for all this business right now, but I'm going to take a wild guess that there are way more cannabis businesses operating on Low Divide Road right now than we're going to permit. And the amount of traffic that's happening right now on Low Divide Road isn't going to quote unquote increase. And that's my guess. Maybe that's short-sighted, but if we're talking about permitting 100 commercial grows up Low Divide, then maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But
maybe 10.
I can't imagine the county is going to sit here and permit more than a handful of commercial grows up Low Divide Road, and so the current traffic load on Low Divide Road, in my humble opinion, isn't going to be increasing. That doesn't mean the county needs to find some way to mitigate the cost to maintain the road that's already being degraded significantly right now because nobody knows literally what's going on the road. You know,
I'd say there's probably a maximum of 10 suitable parcels that have owners who are interested in putting in what it takes to run a permitted farm. I would say 10 would be a lot up Low Divide.
I think the last time we checked, Low Divide Road is the most expensive road in the county to maintain annually.
I'm going to guess that in the future, this is, looking ahead and just having a prediction of my own, the actual number of cannabis operations on Low Divide Road is probably going to decrease.
Yeah, well, until the enforcement happens.
Based upon enforcement shutting down, illegal grows and then permitting only X amount of commercial grows. But that still doesn't discount the fact that the county needs to figure out a way to maintain some better funds to maintain that road and then control the runoff issues and all of those other issues that have to do with water quality and the environment. We still need to figure that out, but I don't think it's going to get any worse than it is today.
Rosanna, do you know why it's so expensive to maintain? Is it the amount of traffic? Is it the grade? What is it?
Right now, it's the volume of traffic and the speeds. If we could slow people down, we could keep the rock on the road. We wouldn't have to grade it as often. We wouldn't have to bring rock as often. But right now, I don't know how often we're grading it, but it's multiple times per year, and it's expensive.
It's driven like a racetrack by a lot of people at maximum speed with four-wheel slides around every corner, shoving all, and the slope too.
Very, very heavy slope in a lot of locations.
Yeah, so it's not going to decrease until there's some enforcement on the illegal operations. But there's a lot of homesteads up there. I counted 37 of them. The ones that I know about that you can't see, and the ones that you can see from the road, I counted 37. I think the county has maybe 3 permits up there for whatever, tool sheds and stuff, maybe one house, but there's really not.
So would it be possible to use the track and trace program to determine the quantity of product being moved and then back estimate the amount of traffic and equipment that's being moved up a road legally? So you could estimate the use for cannabis that way. Would that be a way? Because you were worried, Joel, about finding a way to actually assess whether or not people are complying and estimating their traffic correctly.
Well, until we permit something, there won't be any legal cannabis going up Low Divide. The last time I looked, the state has not made available track and trace data to counties the way Washington has.
Yeah, I don't think they intend to. They intend to keep it separate and not accessible to county information. But even if you did, it'd be a long time before we have track and trace data to compare to road data. I mean, we need like a, I don't know, we need a traffic count or something, but.
You know, and it sounds like low divide is problematic for more reasons than just cannabis. If there's a bunch of unpermitted homesteads up there, you know, making the maximum 10 permitted grows up there bear the cost of maintaining a road for dozens of unpermitted homesteaders isn't exactly fair.
I mean, low divide has been before I was born, that's a place it's a common area where people have gone and homesteaded and placed their homes. I mean, it's riddled with houses all through there. You know, the further you get from town, the less that becomes a problem on some of these Forest Service roads. Like, let's pick another one in the counties, Patrick's Creek Road. That's a really common one for illegal commercial, or illegal grows. There's been countless drug busts that spur right off that road with semi-trucks being found way up top of that hill. That's the road that has the same impacts and the same issues. I'm sure with the county has this, they're constantly grading that road as well. It's a very commonly driven road, although there's probably there's less. Is it a Forest Service road?
Patrick's Creek Road is the county maintained road.
Oh. Okay, that's what I thought.
We do spend money up there. It's not as much as low divide. The other thing I was going to mention is if there is a property that's permitted through the county but has to cross a Forest Service road, you are going to be required to get a use permit from the Forest Service. So just keep that in mind as well, since they are a federal agency.
Yeah, that was an issue that we had some questions about. We're trying to figure out how other counties are dealing with it, and I think Humboldt doesn't have a good answer yet, really, how they're just sending out the neighbor notifications to the Forest Service and kind of letting them deal with it. I think. I'm not positive about that, but I'd like to know.
They actually haven't interacted much yet with Redwood National Park, which is in their jurisdiction.
Is that a state, Redwood? Oh, national, never mind.
No, the national park. Nor have they done much with the Forest Service, which is a significant issue because they are federal. That's a different jurisdiction with different rules about cannabis.
And our county code requires that people show evidence they have access all the way to the nearest county maintained road. So we would require proof of a use permit to issue a permit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, low divide's probably like one of the closest to town roads that isn't paved. And I know that you've made efforts to get grants to pave that road. And I don't think cannabis would help with that with federal grant money. But I think that the county having a better understanding of what's already going on up there in terms of just living and construction and homesteads, may be a way.
When I wrote the last grant application for low divide, I did have to count structures up there, so I do have a pretty good idea of what's there.
Right.
I don't know what's permitted versus what's
That's
not.
What I mean.
But
yeah, it's like I think it's like
10
to 1 permitted to not unpermitted. So. Okay. Sounds good. Answers most of my basic questions on the road, and I'm not sure how to metric it though. How to figure out like what's appropriate load on the road and what isn't. But.
Well, I think what we would inevitably do is just, the conditions that engineering puts on the permit. It wouldn't be codified what exactly the standards are or the metrics because I don't know. But when you go and apply for a use permit, engineering is going to put conditions on. Isn't that what you normally do for things?
Not for county road though, is what I'm thinking.
Yes, we would. So under our county road standards, it would say that the property owners, and that's where you get back to this existing roads on the front page, the 12.04.085. In theory, they would be paving the road at that point. Now, we haven't done that on low divide, and it would be a whole bunch of piecemeal, but that would be the level that our code is looking for, technically.
Right, so I guess the question, is that something that, like, the county would ask residents to pay to pave the road? Like, I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Or is this like, is that a thing?
Yes, we do, but typically we do it closer to town because up there, it's like what our sidewalks look like in town. You have patches of sidewalk here and there.
Right.
That's coming out of our road standards but.
Oh, right, when you have to build a sidewalk in order to get to
But
right, I seen that.
You'll see the patches of sidewalk.
Yes.
It would look similar to that if we required people to start paving, and the pavement would just get degraded because of the rock hitting the pavement, so.
Right, like no one would do it, I can tell you flat out, no one's gonna spend however, what, couple $100,000 to pave a section of road and build a sidewalk.
Yeah, and I think when I
Which
did,
is hence the reason why either the city or the county, I forget what we're talking about here, but the sidewalks, for example, has or is talking about putting a limitation on how much you can charge to put the sidewalks in, right? Like, isn't that an issue where properties, when they're changing hands or getting permits, can't even afford to sell the property when the county or the city is requiring sidewalks around a whole block? It's more expensive than the cost of the property. And that's been a changing thing. And so when you, in my mind, and we were talking about possibly if someone puts a business way up Low Divide Road, where there's thought that the county has the ability or somehow to require that people pay to pave all the way up to that business, well, there needs to be some kind of cap. You can't sit there and, I mean, you could, but that's why you have properties that are completely abandoned in this county. Because you can't tell somebody living at the top of Low Divide Road, you owe me $2.5 million to pave this road if you want to sell your $10,000 piece of property, right? So there has to be some cap on what we're telling people, what they can and can't do with the paved roads. Now, on the other hand, paving Low Divide with let's say, blacktop or whatever people normally pave their driveways with is not viable. Right? It's going to last 2 or 3 years, and then it's going to become this potholed mess that you can't maintain without ripping it all up or repaving it. Because as things break, you can't just keep repaving like you do a highway.
Yeah, that's
that
not
type
an
of
option.
stuff.
I guess.
So I mean, I think there's a litany of
Right.
how are you going to. You can't necessarily pave these long county roads
Sure.
through this abatement process.
Yeah, we don't, if that's the thing, then we don't need to talk about it at all. But the question is like, for example, the county has permitted commercial operations on Low Divide with the caveat that the road has limited capacity to carry traffic. Now, where does that end? There's not very many people who applied for use permits up there of a commercial nature. I think my friend was maybe one of the first. So there's obviously a process for it. It's already been done. What is the metric for determining how much of that can be done? And I don't know that, it sounds like we don't really have a very good metric for that. And that's sort of why I'm leaning, if we're gonna talk about outdoor in the first stages here, then it should be the smallest tier available to the state, because that already generates a fair amount of traffic. If you want to do an experiment to see what happens, that's the only way you're going to know. You've got to start with the smallest tier of business operation.
Rosanna, are you familiar with that use permit on Low Divide? Was it for an orchard?
I am
Something like that,
familiar
fruit
with
stand?
Farm stand, yeah.
Yeah, it was a few years back, and I don't recall the specifics of it. I do remember writing a fairly creative condition on it or statement, but we don't get very many permits up Low Divide, and yeah, I don't recall the particulars of it, but I do know that it was a creative condition.
Right.
So, we can design an ordinance that allows cultivation of 5,000 square feet in places like Low Divide. And then one of the conditions on the use permit will be kind of whatever engineering decides is appropriate based on the operation plan. We could do that. In fact, I think that's the way I'd want to go, except that you'd have to understand that the conditions they might put on there make it untenable. You might get to the end of this thing after we wrote an ordinance only to find out it's not going to be profitable.
We should find that out first, right? Wouldn't that make sense to find out what those conditions would look like before?
If I remember correctly, and it's been a few years, I think the last time I checked, we were spending, depending on the year, $40,000 to $60,000 to maintain Low Divide.
$60,000 on Low Divide, yeah.
So what would happen if we removed all of the illegal traffic on it? How much would our costs go down? I don't know. And how much is the traffic contributing? I don't know. It's a really hard metric because it is a rocked surface. So a lot of traffic impact analysis and those kinds of considerations are based on hard surfacing. And also the other thing is on a county maintained road, you were asking for kind of limitations on what we can ask for. And our code says at a minimum along the frontage of the property. On corner lots, we typically require people to go around the corner because that's kind of the frontage and there's no one else going to pick it up. And then we can require more than that. If it's a substandard road less than 20 feet, we will typically require them to go until they can get to 20 feet.
You're talking about paving a road? Or
Paving a road,
just
rocking a road,
Rocking a road, creating a
whatever.
road.
Widening the road to
Widening
make
the
it
road.
20 feet, right?
Making it acceptable to these codes.
Sure.
Yeah,
There's
20
some spots.
20 feet's really the minimum in the world of
Yeah.
safety.
There's some spots on the divide where it's getting narrow.
So it seems to me we write the code appropriately, and then if it's not viable for business, it's not viable for business. I mean, that's basically the bottom line. And that's a decision the business owners have to make.
Sure. Just so long as the understanding, you know, from the perspective of the county is accurate about what the impacts of the business are, is all. You know, I mean, I have neighbors who generate more traffic than any business will ever be up there, and they will continue to, and they have no interest in getting any permits for anything, let alone a cannabis permit. So,
Well, you know, the ultimate piece of this is we're going to have to enforce, and we're going to have to find that money somewhere. You know, roads money is a segregated fund. We couldn't take roads money out. We couldn't take $60,000 that we were going to spend maintaining low divide and just do nuisance enforcement on the road, thinking we're going to save that $60,000. We need to come up with it somewhere else, and that makes it hard. We got one officer, and he's got a budget of like, I don't know, $13,000 or something for the year.
sure.
I mean, obviously that is a political problem. We can't solve with this ordinance, but we understand, yeah.
It's not really cannabis related, but I just think that in general, like allowing people to participate in society and getting permits and things sort of encourages people to do so, you know, and like up low divide, the reason why people haven't gotten permits is because it's really hard. And one of the reasons is the county road is not sufficient, and we run into things like, well, individual property owners have to end up spending a lot of money that other counties have already spent out of their general fund to make it easier for you to develop your property. Like power, for example, low divide's pretty close to town. There's transmission lines that go across the place, yet there's still no power up the road. That makes it difficult for people to develop just stuff like that. You know?
Right, but I mean, the power doesn't come as a gift from the county. I can speak from the experience
Sure.
of finding the grants to run power out on the reservation out 96 and 169. There are still segments of the reservation with no power, even though we've spent the last 15 years pulling in millions and millions of dollars in grant funds to get the power out there.
Right.
It's USDA, RUS funds and things like that that get the power out there. So what
Sure.
you need to do is work with the county to write the appropriate grants to
Right.
get power to your community.
People need easier, I mean, this is, like I said, we're getting off topic from cannabis, but it needs to be easier for people to be able to get permits to do development in some way, in some sort of step process in a place like low divide where there aren't services. It's difficult to even get contractors and trucks up there sometimes. And so that makes it so that there's, you know, like if all the people who were there were on the books and their homesteads were permitted and they had permitted homes, the power company would be, wow, we got 50, 60 customers up here. They'd start looking into what it would take to build a substation. But as it is now, there's nobody living on low divide. There's a few use permits for tool sheds, and that's it. So as far as the county is concerned, there's nothing going on up there. You know, like there's no actual, I mean, there's a lot, the county sees it a lot less than what is actually there. So, and so all of these kinds of things, I think, promote development in general, giving people the ability, the reason, giving them an incentive to pull permits, spend money in developing their property. All these things that we can do, I think, helps the community at large to get with it, you know, and get, get with the modern times, get permits, Sure, a lot of people live there just for that reason. Exactly. Exactly, you're exactly right.
Well,
But I do know a lot of people who would if they could, they just can't afford it.
We've got the tax structure, that's going to go before voters does, but we haven't talked about permit fees, right? So could we add on so we could have a heavier cost on a permit fee for something that's so far up a county gravel road?
Well, permit fees are tough because they really have to be reasonably calculated to cover the county's actual cost. And we don't know that up front. It's hard to know, and we can't kind of just go around and make up an estimate for one particular person and say, well, I think your permit's going to cost X number of dollars. We have to set a permit fee. A lot of accounting and stuff will go into that, but that gets us back to the same thing. If the county actually covered its costs on these permits, I don't think anybody would be able to afford them.
Not a permit fee, for your cannabis permit, but separately if you need a trip permit. It'd be like not everybody pays the same permits, pays for the same permits.
I don't know how those work.
I'm not too familiar with them. They're done through the road division, and again, it would come back to establishing what is a reasonable fee. I came up with a potential methodology, but I don't know what a reasonable fee would be. And then it also comes back to traffic volumes.
Right.
One option would be we could require a traffic impact analysis prepared by an engineer for every use permit for cannabis, and that potentially could give us better information, but I don't know how much data is out there to use.
Sure. I think it could be doable at some point to figure out, at least at a starting point, like what a reasonable fee would cost, but
I think
it would take time.
There are also cognate roads in other counties. I mean, Bald Hills Road comes to mind. It gets more traffic than Low Divide, I would guess, but there are good measures of the traffic and of the impacts of the traffic on the road. And so you could gather other counties' data and infer an estimate without doing a traffic analysis for every property.
Excellent. Traffic analysis sounds okay. Yeah, public comment. We haven't done any public. Yeah, yes, absolutely. My apologies for not mentioning the public comment earlier. Thank you.
Hello. So a couple thoughts that come to mind just as I'm listening, and I did step in kind of late. So I don't, maybe I missed something, but there seems to be an awful lot of attention on Low Divide Road in that segment. And the idea that that is going to be the region or the permitted area for cannabis grows, in my humble opinion, is not quite sustainable from the perspective of cultivation of the plant. If anything, any permitted grows up there would not be sustainable. The primitiveness of the region, the environmental factors which are prevalent on Low Divide Road are not conducive to cannabis cultivation that would pass state standards for contamination. It seems like an appealing area. Also, the idea of people being lumped into one zone up there, that's probably the least prime area to cultivate cannabis within the county, just because it's removed from the public eye. Maybe, in my opinion, seems to be what is the appeal. Also, the nature of the property and the property owners up Low Divide Road, they don't have the sophistication or the financial funds to adequately pull off what is taken to operate one of these to make one of these on board, above board operations, especially of the size scale, even 5,000 square foot, that's a huge cultivation space. And most of it would not pass. You need such a much more technologically intact infrastructure, more than what someone's generator could provide to them, power-wise. And to pass state regulations for what you see in Trinity County, Humboldt County, Mendocino County, et cetera, and now down in Santa Barbara area, you would need a fair amount of construction to happen in an above-board way. I'm familiar with a lot of people who have permits throughout the state. They keep the money in the county, and like in Trinity County, for example, if you're going to have a permit, the land has to be worked by a Trinity County, some sort of company that's handling the electric or the building, some sort of a private contractor. So it stimulates local economy there, brings jobs outside of just the person who's cultivating the cannabis. As far as a concern for the traffic on the road, I'm not sure exactly of the map, but I don't know how much or how often Green Diamond Resources uses Low Divide Road.
Yeah, lots of logging up there.
In my fair estimation, I've spent a lot of time up Low Divide Road over the years. And I think that the bulk of the riffraff that happens is from people either going up there to do logging for their homes for firewood, or for commercial operations that are going up there to cut firewood or to access Green Diamond gates. I think that the few people that are living up there, they're not the type of people that are going to be able to maintain the financial infrastructure to keep a sophisticated grow going, to remunerate effectively, to pay for road improvements. It's also not going to be these cannabis grows are also not by nature something that's going to bring, the word business is an interesting term to it because that's a new thing that's brought to this community, the idea of it being a business, because it's actually more of a sustainable approach to farming, something that's been illicit in the eyes of the law and in many communities such as Del Norte. But it doesn't and wouldn't necessarily bring such an influx of road volume traffic in the terms of employees or construction vehicles to even warrant the extent of the discussion that I just walked in on. And just in my opinion, I don't think that that's even the prime zone. Whether or not it's, I don't know what the county lines look like as far as where would be able to be permitted for cultivation for certain types of permits. But what comes to mind, just because I don't want to see, you don't want to see people fail, go through all these jumps, spend everyone's time coming to do this, low divide, low divide, low divide. This is a big area, and sure, there's other hoops that seem to be more substantial to jump through than focusing on that zone, which isn't going to be sustainable in the long run anyways, because the amount of money that would need to be put into infrastructures on Low Divide without having a power grid up there. Just outdoor cannabis can't be cultivated on Low Divide and pass state regulations for the molds, etc. It just can't. It doesn't. The plant isn't meant to be grown in that environment. That's the coast up there that sees the first bit of the coastal fog. No matter how advanced your greenhouse is, you're going to be battling environmental issues that are going to overcome the plant and the grow and the grower. I see in a county of this size, with the amount of finances available to most of the people interested in having these permits that are living in Del Norte County, not bringing in residents from other counties or other states coming here to take advantage of the potential new openings for cannabis cultivation, I would actually see a more important facet to focus on at this point, or at least an equally important facet to focus on at this point would be small-scale indoor cultivation, which is extremely controllable, more cost-effective, puts out a more controlled, high-quality product that is more likely to pass state standards, is going to cost less to produce for the cultivator in terms of additions to the land, etc., and will also decrease traffic by condensing any one zone to be like, this is the cannabis grow zone. And I think that if you want there to be a glut of cannabis coming out of the county and create an export potential, then large outdoor grows are that avenue. If you want something to be more of a sustainable thing for county residents that stays within the county or within the region, then smaller scale grows distributed more widely is a much more effective approach. Cottage industry, 500 square foot to 1,000 square foot indoor cultivation permits will produce the best medicine and the most desirable products that will in turn be more robust small businesses as opposed to a 10,000 square foot outdoor cultivation, which is a vast operation, which there's probably not the local know-how to pull off effectively. A rogue grow in the forest that is a thing of the past, that's a black market thing that's not anywhere. It's hard to even have a parallel discussion about a permitted cannabis grow and a black market cannabis grow. So somehow I think that in order to make this work for the community, we'd have to think outside the box a little bit more and maybe hear the opinions of some people that are involved in the industry, in the community. Bring in a couple of people from counties that they've seen success in these programs. As far as the track and trace thing goes, I think the proof is there in the communities that it doesn't work. It's more expensive to manage a track and trace program. The nature of the farming techniques isn't conducive to the track and trace. These are living plants. They're hard to keep track of in that sort of a nature. And in Mendocino County, it's been a huge failure. That's why you're not seeing reports on it. Also, the people that are establishing the guidelines for such things like track and trace aren't involved in the cannabis community, so they have no concept of what it takes to, they don't have years of experience cultivating, etc., to understand what goes into the whole process. So I think there's some opinions that need to be added. Not saying that mine is any more valid than anyone else's. They're just some things that come to mind by listening. But low divide, I'm not sure exactly what the intent is for that region, whether it's because that's where you guys see suitable and based on county lines, or if it's county land or state land or whatever. I'm not versed in these terms. But I do know that it's not a sustainable area to cultivate. And the amount of money that people would generate from their cultivations would not warrant repairs to Low Divide Road, which they would not be really adding to increased gravel usage, etc. Even a 10,000 square foot grow might have a couple of employees, 2 or 3 employees. So, and yeah, maybe 10 pieces of property up there at the most would even be permittable. So the amount of traffic that gets based on people going up there to party and drink beer and cut wood and mess around isn't going to change because of a few licensed cannabis grows. That's just plain talk. Trying to have the concept that it will is a waste of talking.
I agree. Yeah, dirt bikes and camping is
Yeah.
predominant traffic up there.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, the road degradation is due to lumber extraction, whether for home use or commercial use.
Yeah. The lumber traffic there is real seasonal. There's been years that have gone by where they haven't done any harvests in the last couple of years. There's not just Green Diamond, there's other private timber holding companies up there cutting. And it's been a lot more activity in the last couple of years. But there was a handful of years where there wasn't a log truck that went up there for probably 5 years. And you can look at the timber harvest permit records and see that it had been pretty quiet for a long time. But recently it changed.
Yeah, there was kind of a clear cut up there, I think a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And
Roosevelt Elk Habitat Restoration. That was what that was called.
Yeah, I don't think, just to address part of what you were saying, I know I'm not, and I don't know if anybody else exactly is implying that low divide being a specific place.
No, it's just an example
cannabis.
we're using.
I just keep using it because everybody's familiar with the road, because we keep talking about wanting to do this in PO property and Forest Service property, or not Forest Service property, but all these timber lands. And this is the issue we have when you talk about wanting to do all this stuff on these unmaintained, essentially non-paved roads. That's what you're talking about when using all this type of property. So the effects of what's happening on Low Divide Road can be extrapolated to all these other roads. We could sit here and talk about Ratty Creek Road, we could talk about Little Jones Creek Road, we could talk about French Hill Road, we could talk about any road per se. It's just the use of that as a kind of a general stereotypical road, that if you're going to be growing on these forested properties, you're going to be using a road like Low Divide Road, and these are the issues that we need to
The reason why we're focusing on it now is because we have engineering here, and it's an agendized item to talk about.
And it probably would be, it's an example of if somebody picked, let's say a different road, let's say Little Jones Creek Road or something like that, and we all of a sudden decided that we should have 15 commercial cannabis, or people applied and got 15 commercial cannabis permits up a road like that, well, that cost to maintain that road would probably increase to something similar to what Low Divide Road is now, right? So these are the things that, I guess, when we're talking about roads, why we keep going back to that road per se. But I agree completely with you that.
But we both know that there's not 15 parcels of land available up Little Jones Creek Road as well.
No, but I mean.
So an idea that I have, just to toss this out there and change it up a little bit, is we want this project to be successful. We don't want the community to say, oh, see, we told you so. These potheads, it's done, it failed. It's caused more problems. You want this to flourish and be a successful thing. You want to add some robustness to the local economy with a respected view, so that people can say that they're proud of the work that they do. And so throughout California, one thing that has been lacking, where I think that Del Norte could shine, Del Norte's a small county, you guys live here, you understand it, is that everyone keeps talking about these cottage industries. Everyone wants to have a cottage industry that kind of puts their little county on the map, but in the meantime, it's kind of the race to the bottom. All these people are taking in folks from out of state, or other investors from Southern California or the Bay Area with big money. They want to do these huge pot farms, and everyone wants to become a mega millionaire, and it's just not reality. So a lot of people are folding, and they're also creating a product that isn't to state standards. Might be to black market standards, but not to actual standards for healthy consumption. So I see a small opportunity, actually a big opportunity, for Del Norte to become the potential leader of the cottage industry, where it allows folks to be able to have small, manageable cultivations of high quality products that would be desirable, that would keep a high market value, and would be able to be successful in manifesting as a finished product without failure. so that they would be sustainable, so that in years to come, it could be looked at as a successful model. Instead of trying to model somewhere else that has a community and an environment more conducive to large-scale outdoor cannabis cultivation. We're just not here. We're just not there in this county. And I don't know that it ever will be, because it's not like the fog is going to stop coming. But I do see the opportunity to become a flagship of the cottage industry, to open up the ability for people who don't need to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into a property just to, you know, have a small cannabis business. So in some way, I think that in the future, a discussion should be opened up about a smaller cottage industry, a proliferation of smaller indoor grows, a good set of fair guidelines based around indoor cultivation, which does happen in this county. I'm sure a lot of people have partaken in it over the years. There was several places that were hydroponic stores, etc. And I think that that would afford the ability to say, hey, look at, this is what we did. We're successful. We're
I
a small
agree.
county.
I wish Humboldt and other counties had started out in kind of the model more of what you're talking about. I'm glad that you came to speak today. I kind of felt like I was the only one back in the beginning who was kind of talking the talk like you're talking about. I'd like to see municipalities take more advantage of the 500 square foot cottage industry license type. A year ago, I thought that was going to be a piece of cake to be in everybody's garage. But now I realize a lot of the community development issues, planning issues that go into that, problems that are created by that when you have an operation that's publicly on the books in a neighborhood. I definitely get where you're coming from.
Areas like Elk Valley Road, et cetera, all those
Sure.
storage sheds and stuff.
Sure, yeah, manufacturing zones,
Yeah,
right. It's the rural
manufacturing zones.
residential areas where where localities have gotten into permitting and rural residential zones that sort of have created lots of neighborhood concern.
And also
lot of
manufacturing
riot and
permits.
stuff. Sure.
As opposed to just large outdoor
Sure,
cultivation.
yeah, we talked a
permits.
lot about that at our previous meetings, a lot of focus on manufacturing, small scale manufacturing.
Try to find a place where Delnort fits in,
Certainly,
you know, as opposed to trying to mimic these other counties that have
yeah.
more robust financial
I think
populations.
we've done a pretty good job of that, I'd have to say. We definitely have our own, we're definitely not copying the model of others. I think we're probably one of the most unique processes we have here and are focusing on the small scale for sure.
And maybe as
And,
far as some of the leftover revenue goes, there could be a segment that says like the taxes from such and such proceeds, percentage of your sales goes towards, yes, road improvement or goes towards local education. Make sure that that money is put into the appropriate things that need it, so that the community is welcoming of the growers,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, we have a tax ordinance that passed. It'll be on the ballot, although it's a general fund tax, I believe. So
60 million extra that wasn't ever available now per year goes into Colorado public education directly from dispensary sales in Colorado. 60 million is a lot of money, you know. So anyways, just some ideas.
yeah, thank you.
Well, let me talk about some of those things. I think, the reason that we've keyed on Timberland from the beginning is that it's out of sight.
Right.
And we've been sensitive to the fact that a lot of people still don't want to see it or really know about it. Now, that may have changed substantially over the last 2 years that we've been talking about this. I'm not really sure. But it is sounding like not just low divide, but really most timberland isn't maybe viable. I mean, it just might not be affordable and a good place to do it. I think the kind of bugaboo people are going to have is this idea that it's in little unmarked buildings all over town and everybody's going to be panicked about that. So, in time with a little education and seeing it work, like I do agree, whatever we do has to work. It has to work. It has to work for the growers to prove that they can grow responsibly. I want this thing to work to prove that local government works. I mean, that's been my goal from the beginning. And so I think we need an ordinance that's going to lead to successful businesses, not just a bunch of failures. And maybe, you know, Heidi looks at the general plan and decides that manufacturing is a good zone for growing indoors. It sounds like that might honestly be the best place financially for the business if that's going to be on the grid, if it's going to be in buildings that already exist and things. It might be the easiest for us to mitigate the impacts. So we'll see what Heidi comes back with. I don't know where Heidi went, but you know, that might be where we focus. But if the planning issues get in the way of the manufacturing or the C4, that still leaves us with a conversation about ag land, which if we have to go through the Coastal Commission, well, we would have to go through the Coastal Commission if we do it in the coastal zone. That's going to add a lot of time. We can still say, look, we pass an ordinance and it's with coastal now, it's their deal, but it's not going to be done by January 1st because Coastal Commission's Coastal Commission.
Joel?
Yeah.
Is it possible to do a coastal zone ordinance and a non-coastal zone ordinance?
Yeah, that's what we always do. So I was about to say, most of our ag land is in coastal, so that's kind of the thing that we focus on, but we would do both. And then, you know, a lot of ag land, especially stuff that's kind of east of 101, would be stuff where it wouldn't have to go through coastal, and that could be available as early as, you know, 30 days after passage. So maybe that is starting small. It's the non-coastal ag if manufacturing doesn't work out.
I think that, speaking to what you said, I didn't catch your name, but yeah, I think the argument could be made that pretty much anywhere north of San Luis Obispo maybe, or north of San Francisco, outdoor cultivation is not competitive with operations that you see like in Carpinteria. You know, I've heard people say that all over the place. So that argument could extend to say that there's certain areas of our county where outdoor cultivation isn't viable, or the weather isn't correct, or the people aren't the right kind of people, or whatever. But I don't think that those are, I don't know, those are sort of sideways reasons to say that outdoor cultivation can't be viable or sustainable. I think that's too specific to individual people's experiences. You know, outdoor cultivators and indoor cultivators will argue amongst each other about what's possible indoor and outdoor. And I know a fair amount about both indoor and outdoor cultivation. And I see a lack of perspective in each of the groups, not understanding the other sides. But absolutely, that's why I pushed for the smallest scale of outdoor cultivation allowed, 2,500 square feet, because if you're just trying to go scale, the mountains aren't right. It doesn't matter if you're in Humboldt or Trinity or wherever. If you don't have the grid, if you don't have, you know, highway corridor access, labor access, you know, capital access, all these things, you know, then you're not going to be competitive on the open market with just production. But like you're talking about, it's not about just producing pounds. That's not what, you know, a small community is about, a North Coast community where our environment is most pristine. It's about niche markets, specialty production, you know, putting your heart and soul into it, not just pouring a bunch of money into it. And that can take different forms. And I can show you farms that are beautiful in the Low Divide region, the French Hill region, in places where some people say it's too coastal, or there's not enough infrastructure, or whatever. And they operate with no impact and no waste, burning no fuel. So it is possible. It depends on your business model. If you have a business model that's really overhead intensive, then you have a problem. You're not going to be able to do it in places where you don't have resources, where delivery and traffic are an issue. But if your business model is geared to be sustainable, then it can work. And I think to judge people's ability to be creative and produce in environments that may not be considered prime by the industry, I think is short-sighted and doesn't give people the opportunity to really bring their genius to the table.
I think the job of the working group and the ordinance is to provide the conditions and the framework where cannabis does not disrupt the community and doesn't disrupt other values that are held in the community. I think whether or not a businessman chooses to do something that puts his capital at risk or her capital at risk is a personal decision. And so I don't think we need to write the ordinance in order to protect them. We need to write the ordinance so that it makes sense for the county and the constituents within the county, including the business people, but not exclusively for them. So to the extent we are worrying about whether or not people can make a go of it, I think we're misdirecting our attention.
I agree.
Well, the vast majority of the public comments from the beginning of this thing have been pro-cannabis and wanting a viable industry here. I think if we are over-mitigating, if we are over-protecting the community, we may be misunderstanding what the community is, because the community that's come to speak has largely been a pro-cannabis community. If it's not viable and it doesn't work, that's fine. If it's not viable and doesn't work because we've required things we don't need or made it too hard, I think that's a problem. I think that's not what we've been directed to do by the board of supervisors.
We're dealing with the board and with the public, which are two very different, possibly, viewpoints about what the public wants. So I don't know that the two are jiving necessarily. That's part of our job, I suppose, is to figure out how to gauge both the public and the board who's going to be deciding whether or not the ordinance will pass. So.
Okay, so we've just discussed this road thing, right? And so this is a small portion of outdoor grow, right? I mean, this is a huge thing. It's a huge issue, one of the bigger issues. Back to what are we going to pick to talk about and try to push forward? Indoor cultivation is something we should probably try to hammer out and get something written. And that largely, at least what we're talking about, being on the grid and so forth, can eliminate the road issue that we have sitting here in front of us, because we're not talking about using this type of
You were
road.
not at the last meeting, right, Bobby? No. Right, we talked about ag uses, like existing ag buildings up to 5,000 square foot growing. We're talking about those issues. Should we use the rest of our time to kind of pick up back on that in indoor, the possibility of indoor in existing ag, where it's appropriate, where it's not too close to residential?
I'd like to make sure that we bring it back so that Blake can weigh in, because he had very strong feelings about that.
Yeah, he was here at the last meeting and talked about it, and so, yeah, definitely. Won't be making any decisions, but see what Bobby has any input and just talk some more about that. I think it's appropriate in certain ag zones where there's enough space to have an indoor operation. They're usually on the grid. There's other infrastructure there, access, etc. Just like we've heard from other public comment, there are ag zones that are too close to residential zones. Joel thinks there's a way to take care of that and make sure that it's not in places that are too close to residential.
Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation about setbacks, probably. We can get back into whether or not it's an agricultural product at some point. It kind of is. It kind of inevitably is, and we can kind of slow play whether we call it that or not for the right to farm ordinance purposes. But when it comes to actual ag land, I think the agricultural community kind of needs to decide if they want it as a neighbor. The most vocal opponent has been Blake, and so we've kind of been inclined to not really consider it that much. But ag land is kind of where the infrastructure for growing things already exists. It makes sense. The impacts would be minimal. It'd mostly be about kind of community reaction. So if we did come forward with that ordinance, who knows what the public comment would be? All of a sudden it might engage a community that so far hasn't really participated, but I don't know.
Yeah,
One way to find out.
Just to add to something that you said there, Joel, yeah, obviously, legally defined, cannabis is not an agricultural product.
Well, it is, I mean, it is for the Williamson Act, right?
Well,
It is for the Business Professions Code specifically.
There's some gray area going forward, a little bit about that. But from the practical side of that discussion, it's absolutely an agricultural product. There is no question practically that this is a plant that you grow just like every other plant classified under agricultural classifications and whatnot. So yes, these properties are completely appropriate, just as appropriate as every other agricultural commodity that's produced on them. But the placement of them, yes, you have to decide if you're going to, where you're going to place them and so forth on agricultural properties. I still get back to, if you're talking about indoor, why isn't it done in manufacturing zones and commercial zones for that matter, as long as they adhere to proper setbacks?
Or both, you know.
Or all three, yeah.
We might be able to kind of refer back as far as setbacks to our personal cultivation, you know, where we kind of, I think we were at 300 square feet on bigger parcels, you know, or
100 feet for 300 square foot garden, 100-foot setback.
right. So, you know, maybe there's a way to, you know, we kind of figure that wouldn't be too offensive. You know, with the indoor, we have ventilation and all that sort of thing. But, you know, maybe that'd be a good practical place to kind of go back to as far as setbacks, I don't know.
So I think just to sort of speak from where Blake was
Yes.
coming from, we started to talk about what were the goods he was trying to preserve in the community and what were the harms he was trying to
Character,
mitigate.
preserving the character of the farm
And
community.
it was the character and the diversity of the farming community and the concern that the bubble of property prices and the loss, the ability of people to grow anything other than cannabis seemed to be points for him. So I think, you know, I can't speak for Blake, but I think that if we can effectively address those concerns by limiting perhaps density, by limiting perhaps number, by limiting size, or other mechanisms that, again, you know, I'd like to hear from Bobby, but if we can address those concerns, then I think we can find a way to make sensible decisions that deal with the community's concerns. And perhaps what we should do is put an ad in the paper and invite the agricultural community to a cannabis working group meeting explicitly so that we hear from those constituents.
Well, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, there's an extensive amount of the agriculture community sitting on this board right now, right? I mean, we all get that part, right? I don't know where Bobby lays on this, but I did discuss at the last meeting with, and it was specifically with Blake a little bit about, he was concerned about the diversity of agriculture and that this might take it over. And I guess my thought on that is this is absolutely what this is. This is agricultural diversity. Whether people want to consider it agriculture or not, this is specifically the diversity that this region needs something. Everything that is done here is, there's no other things that are done viably here. There's a handful of things, you know. Agricultural producers in this county have tried over and over multiple different crops or other farming things, and it never ever works out. There's a financial barrier to entering a lot of these agricultural diverse operations and possibilities. This is another possible venture that agriculture could use to better diversify their already very limited ability to produce stuff right now.
Yeah, back in the illegal days when it was really cheap to make a lot of money on a very small space, then it did change the character of agricultural lands. You could take a 80-acre parcel as perfectly good grazing land and just, you know, run a little operation in a building and then, you know, to hell with the rest of the property and never use it anymore, you know, for what its intended purpose was, you know, and that was the case. But I think now it's very different. The cost of setting up and running an operation is way more expensive than a conventional agricultural operation. And the profit margins are much more similar to normal business. It's still way out of whack, but it's getting to be much more close to what normal business margins are. So I think a lot of the, just naturally, the threat of changing the character is lessening. But we do need to, like Kate was saying, I think with scale is the first and easiest way to prevent a takeover, small scale to start, and then looking at density also so that they're not, you know, too many close together. All the 5-acre parcels are just growing indoor now, you know, and they're not doing any other farming operation. I don't know. Now, maybe that's not a bad thing though, I don't know.
Well, I think that on the agricultural issue of it, as Joel had mentioned earlier, most of the agricultural prime area is in the Coastal Commission anyhow. But there are a lot of areas that are agricultural out of that. This is a product that can help the agricultural group of this area. They are very limited to what they have that they can grow because of the production and the processing of it. The production, we can grow anything almost here. But processing it and getting it to your clientele is the thing that's going to kill you. The trucking, you know, putting it in a box and getting it to Safeway. You know, you can't, we tried broccoli on our ranch 10, 15 years ago, and it grew great. It was a beautiful product for this area. We had fields and fields and fields, but we couldn't afford to get it anywhere to process it and get it out to the user. So if this can benefit this county, then agricultural land should be it should be on a usage of agricultural land to some diversity, some smaller portion. I don't want to see lilies go away and cattle go away and all that for marijuana or for, you know, the product here that we're talking about. But, you know, in Smith River, when I came on this committee, I was talking about hemp, growing hemp. And there's still a big group that wants to grow hemp. And so that's going to have to be grown in a field type of a situation. It's going to have to be in an agricultural area. So at some time it's going to have to be brought up, and the state's working on it, and probably in the next year people are going to try growing hemp in this area. So people's community-wise are going to relate hemp to cannabis, to marijuana, and they're going to say, oh, they're growing marijuana in Smith River on a farm. You know, there's plenty of areas out in Smith River and Fort Dick and, you know, that are out of the way, nobody's around them, nobody smells them, are the prime place to grow them. But like he said, the fog, the blight, the things on the plant isn't prime maybe for outdoor. So maybe it is the barns or the smaller entities that have, you know, indoor growth out there, but they're on ag property. So, I mean, I'm not against this going on agricultural property, and I'm not really for it. I don't want it to take it over, like Blake. But I do think that it is a proper place to grow it.
Well, we can start kicking around the idea of a 500 and maybe a 5,000 permit, one or both, in ag. I'll bring that idea up to the board. It hasn't been a popular idea with the board in the past, ag. But attitudes have been changing, I think, as people learn more. It's becoming normalized a little bit. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I'll talk to Heidi about, I don't know, you know, the Coastal Commission has been pretty clear they'd like to see it in existing structures in the coastal zone, so we're not creating new buildings. I don't know if that, you know, is a greenhouse going to work in the coastal zone? Does it have to be completely an indoor use? Is it going to have to be artificial light completely? I mean, what are we looking at here?
Well, the state actually had some different clarifications on what defined indoor and outdoor, and it has to do with light usage. So I think you can actually have a translucent light transmitting material and still be considered indoor. It's based on the light density, the wattage density, which I did not know. I thought it had to be an enclosed space. So,
And that's like it's also an archaic way to calculate it too, because with the use of LED lights,
all
your
different
watt
now.
intensity completely changes.
yeah, and that's
The
why
amount
they're
of light
getting
that
with
needs
it.
applied. But absolutely, to your question, Joel, absolutely, in the coastal zone, looking at the ocean from your property, you can grow very viable cannabis in a
Sure. It depends on what you're
greenhouse
producing.
operation.
It depends on what you're producing. You know, if you're trying
Yeah.
to produce like hand-trimmed giant flowers, maybe not. But if you're producing product for extract, or if you're growing hemp, certainly, or if you have a nursery and you're producing plant stock, then Seeing the Beach is probably the perfect environment for producing nursery stock. So,
All right,
definitely.
well, we're running out of time here. I guess we'll meet again next week.
Good.
Yeah, did anybody check
I
on the
don't know.
chambers being available?
We'll check, I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no access to
Heidi
that
usually does
information.
that. She's gone. Rosanna's on it.
You know, we'll think about manufacturing and C4 zones as option 1, and ag inside structures as option 2 right now. And maybe they both work simultaneously if they don't really need that much different treatment. But definitely one's, you know, gonna go to the Coastal Commission and take forever. So,
ag that's in the coastal zone goes to the coastal
Right.
commission, but there's
Yeah.
ag outside the
Outside.
coastal
Right.
zone.
right.
That,
There's also, you know, like a lot of that manufacturing on Elk Valley is coastal zone 2. So even the manufacturing ordinance as it is going to the Coastal Commission, it takes some time, so.
All right. Final public.
On
comment.
record as, I don't know him, but I agree with everything that he just said. I did a little bit of research as far as the number of manufacturing and C4 zones that are actually in the county and not the city, and there are not very many. My concern is that shoehorning indoor operations into such limited spaces may cause the exact thing that you guys were concerned with real estate speculation. The other thing that I noticed in driving by these properties over the course of the past week is that most of them are filled with crab gear. And I would really, really hate for our crab fishermen who have already been hit with the ugly stick repeatedly to have to come up against competition for rental space for indoor cannabis grows. Secondly, I'm really happy that Joel pointed out, and the whole feeling of these meetings has been kind of negative over the past month or so. And I'm really happy to see that, you know, we're realizing that the feeling of the community has changed more towards the positive, and it really always has been very pro-cannabis. I mean, the past 2 or 3 meetings that I've been to, it seems like we're catering to the people who got outvoted. And it's like, you know what, if I gotta live in a world where Donald Trump is the president, then they can take a hike. I don't really care. So thank you. I appreciate that a lot. Yeah, that's all I had to say. There's, according to the Planning Commission, I had them kind of do a little bit of research into it. There's about 30 or 40 actual commercial C4 specifically and M-zoned properties in the entire county. There's not very many. According to our MLS, there's been 3 properties in the last 10 years that have sold with that particular zoning on it. So it's very, very limited. So that might be something that you guys need to take into consideration when you're trying to come up with where the zoning for these 500 square foot cottage grows might be viable. I think you're going to see a lot of scrambling to find those places that work. And I would say probably 50% of them, from what I've seen, are actually right up against residential neighborhoods. And that just, like, if you got a 500-foot setback, you're going to wipe out the entire left-hand side of Oak Valley Road. And then you've got Hambros, which is burned down, which is the only other section of that manufacturing zone that's actually available. So, yeah, I just wanted to make you guys aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I checked, and the chambers are available next week at this time.
Wednesday, okay.
I don't know who posts the agenda, but
They already have.
For next week?
They haven't posted the agenda, but they sent out the invite.
Okay, I was asked to remind you guys, whoever posts the agenda for this meeting needs to get a hold of Kylie.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's Heidi or if it's one of you.
Yeah, it'll be me.
It's actually, yeah, I mean.
Or Joel.
Kylie's usually the one who does all the work, so I'm sure she'll.
Already got it. Not the agenda.
Right, right. Yeah, she usually makes sure to find me before the deadline to confirm if Blake's not available. Blake's the chairman, so he's supposed to be available to do that, but isn't always. Okay, great. So next week we'll meet here again, 10 a.m. next Wednesday. What's that date? What's the number? All right, August 15th. And for agenda items, do we want to hone in? Do we want to keep this broad so we can talk about whatever we want?
It seems like the cottage, spectrum of 500 square feet, is.
Indoor, should we just focus on indoor for the next one then?
I think we need to give him some direction, so we're going to go with an easy one, the indoor.
Well, let's say that the point of next meeting needs to pick the direction.
So I thought you wanted to get the retail ordinance to us for the next meeting.
Yeah, well, if that, I mean,
I'm just trying
I'll
to
have that agendized if that's going to happen. But as far as this conversation, we'll see what Heidi comes back with about.
Okay, so for first
issue.
agenda item, like focus on a cultivation category, like as an agenda item? Or should we just agree that we want to just focus on the indoor discussion right now?
Yeah, well, I say indoor on manufacturing and commercial, indoor on ag as two different agenda items, and we can just.
Yeah, it sounds like we want to try to move forward with indoor, seems it's
on ag and
easier
indoor and
to
manufacturing.
probably discuss all the facets of
Indoor manufacturing,
of that.
indoor ag. And then we do need to talk about manufacturing licenses a little bit at some point too, because there's some more details, but maybe wait on that for an agenda item. The new regs that came in, there's a couple of small things. I know you're working on that.
Email me what you're thinking.
Okay.
And I might just pop them in what I've got. Otherwise, we can talk about it next meeting.
Okay. Okay, so basically just be focusing on indoor ag, indoor manufacturing zone, and yeah.
Is there any,
Does that need to be on the agenda, indoor
maybe we
sizing?
specify the 500 square foot category? Is this specific? I've seen a lot of interest in it, and the last meeting.
Should that be agenda specifically, or can we just talk about any of that under the umbrella of?
It's okay to talk about under umbrella.
Okay.
If what Robert's getting at is agendizing it might raise some community interest.
Right.
People might say, oh, we're talking about 500, I want to go to that one. Then it's good to agendize.
Okay, okay. Gavel, it's not here. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.